Hello, this is the Be Engaged podcast, where we bring together brilliant minds, elevate discussions across many industries, all in an effort to promote unity. Welcome, I'm your host, Michelle Harper. We are talking today with Mike Marriner. Mike is the co-founder and president of Roadtrip Nation, leading the organization's media and education efforts, and is an author. Hello, welcome to the podcast, Mike.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
All right. Okay, so we start things off with a fun fact, get into the discussion, and then we try to do the best quote of the podcast. Sometimes I forget, so I'll have to remember. If I don't, please remind me. All right, so fun fact. So the organization started as a little road trip in the bright green RV in 2001. Mike Marriner, along with his friends Nathan Gebhard and Brian McAllister, took off on a road trip on a cross-country journey to interview people from various careers to figure out what they wanted to do with their lives. They funded the trip by pooling their savings and pitching sponsors like Starbucks. So this trip sparked a movement that since has turned into a thriving nonprofit organization that we're looking to chat about today. So Roadtrip Nation has produced award-winning documentaries, written books, inspired others to find their own path. And that original green RV, pretty iconic now, like a symbol of the mission, right? So 20 years later,
Yep.
85 million households through public television annually. Oh my gosh, that's a hell of a fun fact. That's a long fun fact.
Thanks.
So it all began with you and your friends wanting to go on a road trip. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So, I think it's a situation that a lot of people understand, that point in your life when you're in your early 20s and you're kind of in high school and then college. And then all of a sudden it's like reality hits and you're like, whoa, what am I going to do with my life? And we were, I was a pre-med major. So I was like thinking about going to science in some way. And I had an internship at Amgen, this biopharmaceutical company in Thousand Oaks. Then I was like pipetting Chinese hamster ovary cells all summer.
Oh gosh.
And I realized like, oh my gosh, I just can't stand this. And I was never like into hospitals, and I don't know what I was thinking, like majoring in biology. I really love it in theory, but just like in practice, I need to be like, I can't be in one situation for too long, like just any kind of sterile environment. So, and then my buddies, Nathan and Brian, Nathan also was a business major, but he was like more of like an artist at heart. He's more of a creative person, and he, business majors usually like go become consultants and stuff like that. And he was like, he's never worn a tie in his life. He's like, whoa, I don't want to do that. And then Brian was going into like the family, like landfill business. And he did that. He had graduated a year before us, and he had been doing that for a year. And he was like, I cannot do this forever. And
landfill. So, that doesn't sound very fun. Just right there.
Some like lobster type thing or something, or I don't know. But so we were all kind of like reassessing everything, and we're like, wait a second, this is a big decision. And so to figure out what do you want to do with the rest of your life. And so how about before we do this, like, let's have like a big exploratory journey, and what if we go across America and just like interview people in different careers and ask them how they got to where they are today. And it was just one of those like late night brainstorm things that were just like, let's just do it.
We're doing it.
we started just like, Brian's family had an old beat up motorhome, the original green motorhome that you mentioned. It wasn't green at the time. It was a 1984 Fleetwood Pace Arrow, just totally falling apart. Like their parents were going to donate it to Goodwill, and we are like, don't do that. Well, we like, the tax write-off was like $3,000. So we think we like pooled our savings and bought their tax write-off, and they gave us the motorhome. Then we painted it green and blue because the paint was like on sale at Home Depot, and it just looked so bad at first. And then we redid the whole interior. It was like really fun. And then we had like no budget. So even like all the pipes were broken. We had like liquid steel the pipes together, and then we set off across America. And for 6 months before that, we had cold called people across America who were just doing interesting jobs and professions and asked them how they got to where they are today. We interviewed, a lobsterman on the coast of Maine, someone from National Geographic in Washington, D.C.
Oh, wow.
Guys, some of the early employees at Burton Snowboards in Burlington, Vermont, a chef in Chicago, Charlie Trotter. My favorite beer at the time was Red Hook Ale. And I was like, I wonder who started this company, Red Hook Ale. So Paul Shipman.
Let's find out.
He was like one of the early pioneers in microbrewing. And we're like, I cold called him and I was like, hey, we're just kind of trying to figure out what we want to do with our life. Can we sit down with you and talk to you about your journey and how you got to where you are today? He was like, absolutely. And then he was kind of like a local legend in Seattle. So then, and he knew Pete Nordstrom, one of the Nordstrom brothers. And so we ended up like interviewing Pete Nordstrom. And then I had been cold calling the founder of Starbucks, Howard Schultz, as well. And not talking to him, of course, but talking to his assistant, Nancy Kent, who was like the sweetest lady ever.
Oh,
And she was like, I obviously like cannot book a meeting with you with Howard. You know, like he's very busy, but like,
you're like, I like you, but not that much.
yeah, exactly. Like, but the week before you come into town, just give me a call and let's see, you know. So we called her and she's like, there's something opened up. Come on in, you know. And so we interviewed Howard Schultz like at the Starbucks School headquarters. And at the time he owned the Seattle Supersonics basketball team. And we like went to a game with him that night. And it was like that kind of a trip. It was just so spontaneous. It was spontaneous, but it was also like a lot of work went into it. We weren't just like a bunch of hippie kids going across America, like trying to, we were very intentional and thoughtful and put a lot of work into it. And we started filming it. We weren't filmmakers, but like the first Sony VX2000 came out, which was the first like low cost, high quality digital video camera, like this big. And we just filmed the whole trip, and I'm glad we did. So,
and all those that like inspiring activities got you to, I mean, 20 years later, you're on PBS. 85 million households, but
85 million households through PBS, and then we're in half of all U.S. public high schools too. So that's like we also license our content to like schools all across America. So half of all U.S. public high schools, 16.5 million students get to like see the content from the road trips. Because now there's like, it's not just all the road trips. We have a database of over 12,000 interview videos now.
Oh, wow.
And we add 1,000 videos to the archive every year. And it's like a database. So like if a kid can't like go on a road trip across America, but they're still trying to figure out like, what are different stories of people and career paths out there, they can come to Roadtrip Nation and be like, oh, wow, look at all these stories of people in different fields, and get better visibility of what might be possible for their future.
Yeah.
So
that's a fantastic fun fact. I love it. So how long have we known each other? Let's remember our beginnings here.
I don't know. I remember you being pregnant a couple times.
Yeah, a few times.
Sorry.
I'm always pregnant. Now I'm not pregnant anymore. So we all our families met through our kids' preschools. And so, I mean, that's probably 10 years at least.
Yeah.
Something like that. And then now we have, mutual friends. And it's hilarious in Laguna where nobody talks about what they do. So I really didn't know. Yeah. So it's taken 10 years for us to figure out what each other does. And recently learned your history in Laguna. You are your family is one of the original like OGs of Laguna Beach. Is that right?
Yeah. My great grandpa came here in like 1927.
Wow.
It was like all dirt roads, and started like the first little bookstore in town. And then, my grandpa was like the first person that I think, one of the middle schools or something. And my dad went to Morrow, and my daughter now goes to elementary school. So it's like crazy, it's fun.
That's so crazy. Yeah, you have one of the longest histories, I think, family histories here. So, we all bow down. We're like, oh, okay, good. I just learned that. Great. So on Roadtrip Nation, so what are some of the recent episodes, and 20 years later, what type of subjects and topics are you working on now?
Yeah, so we, in the early days, it was our first road trip, and then that became like the first road trip documentary on PBS. And then pretty soon after that, we started realizing that what we became really passionate about was providing that experience to other students who were like us, and then doing some storytelling around that. And so year after year, we started launching applications on college campuses all across the country where students could apply for the chance to go on these annual road trips. We had a couple big sponsors, like people like Starbucks and State Farm and AT&T and Microsoft, who ended up like being our early sponsors for Roadtrip Nation. And we would basically put college students on these road trips to go across America and interview people in different careers to explore like, what does the future of work look like? And
so you're recreating your road trip, and you're saying, pass it on. Here, college kids or coming into college, here's your road trip, figure it out.
Totally. Me and my co-founders were the first film crews, and editors. And now we have like, there are 90 employees at Roadtrip Nation. Like half are all like much better videographers and editors and producers than we are. So they're like, okay, you guys step aside. Like, let us do the production.
You're like, gladly, I'm good.
Okay, yes, definitely. But what we've realized too is that the road trips over time, in the early days, they were very general. It was like, oh yeah, just go out, hit the road, and interview whoever you want. Now we're realizing that the road trips are much more purposeful and have higher utility when they're thematic on certain issue areas and fields based on what different learners are interested in or what specific lived experiences learners are dealing with. So we did a road trip years back focused on underrepresented groups in computer science in partnership with Microsoft, who has a big commitment to kind of diversifying the future of computer science. And we had 3 young road trippers, one from Native American background, 2 from Latino background, who went across America and interviewed people in computer science professions all across the country from similar backgrounds as theirs to learn how they got to where they are today. And, the reality is that not everyone sees a place for themselves in the future of work if they haven't, if seen examples of people like them in those fields. And, there's an old phrase that we keep coming across, but it's like, if you can see it, you can be it. And I think we've really seen that in our work. And it doesn't just have to parlay with like 20 somethings. Like we've also done a road trip focused on military veterans. There are 1 million returning service members in our nation every year. And we did a road trip and they're all trying to figure out how do they transition from military to civilian life. And we did an incredible road trip focused on 3 returning service members who all lived in the RV. One was a double amputee. We had to retrofit the motorhome for him. And they went across America and interviewed other people in careers who were also formerly military service members to ask them how they transitioned to future career paths. And it was so fascinating. And all that content's in the archive now. We did a road trip focused on single mothers who have a very unique lens in terms of how to find careers and how to navigate careers. We did a road trip with the former First Lady Michelle Obama, focused on students who are first in their families to go to college. So we had 3 first-gen college students in the motorhome going across America, just as she was. And they interviewed people across America like herself, but other people too that weren't like her, but who were all first-gen and who to talk about that very unique lived experience of how people who are first in their families go to college kind of transition with like lower levels of social capital and imposter syndrome and all those pieces and still kind of have that resilience to get to where they are today. We also do certain industry road trips. We did a road trip focused on clean energy with the governor of New York, because New York is a big leader in kind of clean energy career pathways. We did a whole road trip focused on semiconductors.
Wow.
The chip space is like huge right now, obviously. And so the future of work is so fascinating right now. And there's so many ways. We're looking at doing an AI-focused road trip next year.
Yeah, I was going to say, what are the trends? So obviously AI is going to be in that
There's so
trend,
much change
for sure.
happening in the future of work. And so on one side, it's how do you help document that for the next generation? But also, how do you help frame the storytelling in an asset-based way where everyone feels like there's a place for them in the future of work, even if you don't have like your PhD or a fancy degree, because the reality is that a lot of people we interview don't always have super fancy degrees and training pathways. Some have credential-based programming. Some have boot camp-based, stackable credentials, all these different, there's so many community college-based programming. So in a lot of our storytelling, we're trying to show the accessibility in this new future of work. A lot of people are feeling left behind right now in our country, and that innovation is coming so quickly and that there's not a place for everyone. But we're kind of seeing the opposite when we're out there, is that actually there are so many new paths opening up and so many more routes into those pathways that you can take that have lower barriers to entry. So I think there's a lot to be optimistic for. It's just that optimistic stories in our culture right now, unfortunately, aren't always getting to people.
Not getting to the cycle.
Yeah.
The news cycle. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I love that. Well, I love the collaboration on this because I'm trying to, elevate folks that are uniting people. And just, it sounds like, and I have the same experience when we go on our summer vacations. We usually go for a month and get out there. We get out, we road trip, we find other people, we talk to other people. And what you realize is, we're all basically the same. We want the same things. And it's very uniting just to get out and explore and talk to people that you normally wouldn't talk to or ever be around, to learn something, or just even vacation. Just that road tripping is my passion as well.
Oh my God. It's huge. And it's great for kids too. Just to you're right. Like, especially in this world we live in now where it's also digital and there's so much spin around everything. It's very American too. There's something about hitting the road that is kind of unifying and connecting, and exactly what you said, you realize your people are more similar than they are different. And when you get out there and you travel and you see that, and we see that with the 3 road trippers that go in the motorhomes too. Like oftentimes they're from 3 very different backgrounds, age groups, everything. And at the end of a road trip, they always become family. It's
Yeah.
like, and it's really, it gives you hope for like the human condition and like this time we're in where there's so much polarization, but it's like, actually, we are more alike than we are different, and people just need opportunities to spend time with each other, and not such siloed spaces, and road trips, traveling gets to do that. So
I love it. I love it. And so going back on the trend, so AI is a trend, but my background and what we were talking about earlier was space. So I've been in the space industry for 24 years. So space seems to be a little bit of a trending industry. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, like our dream, we actually met Buzz Aldrin's son recently, like a few
Oh
months
my
back.
gosh, how
And
amazing.
he kind of planted this seed in our head. He was like, you need to do a space for all road trip, which I
Space for all. Okay.
love that framing, because when you think of space, you think of, oh, it can't be for me. It's got to be like a PhD or a superhuman astronaut, but the reality is that in the space industry, it needs tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people to participate, on the factory floor, doing the engineering specs, like doing the public relations, and so the next generation of the space workforce needs to have people from all levels and all backgrounds of society. And the idea of a space for all road trip to be like, if you are interested in space, or if you're curious about it, there's a place for you somewhere, to kind of like take a road trip across America and document all the different types of pathways that are in the space, in this world of space. It's something that's kind of like on our dream board right now. So
Oh, I love it. I'm right there. If you guys end up doing it, I'm right there. Yeah, and it makes me think of the diversity in every industry. There's diversity of thought, diversity of, what people's background is, and they come to the table with different ideas. And there are the folks that need to be on the manufacturing side, but then they need to be on the strategic and vision side, and they need to be, all diversity in skill sets. And like you said, it doesn't matter if you have a degree or not, or a doctorate, or computer science, or astro, whatever. Maybe you're just into art, but you know what? That vision of art or graphics or things like that, but you really wanted to, put it towards space. There's still a place for you. There's a place in all industries for every type of person, really.
And there's a huge labor market shortage right now too, where, in terms of the skilled trades and the new collar pathways, like these are incredible high demand, high wage jobs that don't require big 4-year or post, PhD degrees, but that jobs are unfilled. And so there are a lot of pathways like that I don't think the next generation understands that are out there. We're seeing that in terms of the just the massive labor market shortage and where kind of opportunities are. So increasingly, we're trying to design our road trips as well around like, hey, here are pockets of opportunity that you may have not even known existed. And that's actually true in this skilled trades space. That's a really fascinating area of focus, is skilled trades professions in the space industry. So that I think could represent really, really cool opportunities for the next generation as they're thinking about their future. So
awesome. Okay, so you're in the road trips, you're recording it, you're post-production. How did you go from the stage of doing the road trips and the beginnings to getting it worldwide? Walk us through that process. How does somebody even get their content? A lot of folks are doing content now out to the masses, actually.
It's so funny because I've been thinking more about that lately. Like, it's one thing to like do a road trip, but like, how do you like take a road trip and like make like a 100-person organization out of it? And that's so crazy when I look back on that now. That transition, because it was like, just like being in a time of life where you're kind of being willing to like embrace risk a little bit and change and being okay, like taking leaps of faith and trying lots of things, trial and error. Some things work, some things don't, and just having a big, bold vision and just kind of going for it, And we after that road trip, a few things, and luck. There's always a part of luck and everyone's journey too. And for us, when we got home from that road trip, or on the road trip, we had met someone who knew a writer for Forbes magazine.
Oh, wow.
And so Forbes shadowed our road trip in New York City for a day. We were interviewing the CEO and founder of Barnes & Noble, Len Regio. And so this woman from Forbes, Joanne Gordon, she was like, kind of like, a East Coast, like a little skeptical. She's like, you guys aren't really integrating lend ratio. She's like, she's kind of like going to bust us, I'm like, no, it's on the book. This book, come,
Seriously, they're going to let
sure,
us talk to him.
sure enough, like he cancels that morning
Oh,
because he's busy.
no. Oh,
And
no.
I called his assistant back and just kind of begged. And she was like, all right, come at the end of the day at 4:30. So anyways, this is a long story, but it all worked out. And Joanne came, she wrote the article for Forbes. The article came out like 3 months after we got home from our road trip. And it got a lot of attention, mostly from publishers, book publishers, and from an agent in New York, William Morris Agency, who was like, what if we package the article with your road trip and you guys have all the footage, we can transcribe it into this like book to help 20 somethings like find their roads in life, And so we ended up, they packaged it. We had Random House who ultimately published it. We spent like a year and a half kind of living off of the signing bonus, writing the book. The book came out 2 years later after the road trip. And it was just kind of one step at a time, First, it was the book that came out, the book did really well. That was kind of the next lucky thing, Some books hit, like this one, we were on the NBC Morning Today show with Lester Holt. We were on CNN, BBC, NBC News. I mean, CBS Morning Show, the Late Night Show with Carson Daly on the Saturday Night Live set, and I had a sprained ankle, so I had to like walk on stage with like a sprained ankle and like fake it. But it was
wow, this hurts.
It was like the 15th best-selling book in America for a second on Amazon, and it was like,
wow.
And so that was really what I think gave us some legitimacy. But then that was the next critical moment, which was like, are we just going to turn into like motivational speakers? Which was not our thing. We were like kind of getting burnt out on that. And there was an educational program in Fresno in the California Central Valley called the AVID program that worked with first generation, mostly Latino students. And they were like buying so many books and for their kids in Fresno. And we would like drive up there and do like talk to auditoriums filled with AVID kids. And we even like brought our motorhome up a few times. And I think we saw like, especially for students who have a limited viewpoint of what pathways look like out there.
Yeah.
The impact on those students was like pretty real. And at the same time though, we realized like, hey, these kids don't just want to like live vicariously through our fancy road trip. Like they want to have their own opportunity to get out there and hit the road. And that's where it just hit us like a ton of bricks. Like, okay, it became like a calling for us. It was like, what if Roadtrip Nation could be this thing that gives other students the opportunity to build road trips all over America and have these experiences? And then what if we can then be the storytellers and the content developers around these experiences? We had all this momentum from the book and people we had met and potential sponsors. And so we had gotten a crew of kind of founding sponsors together to fund a first batch of road trips for students, many times students who had the least opportunities to find their career paths, and just started doing it from there. The first year it was on 10 PBS stations. We cold called 10 local PBS stations, and it put us on at like midnight, and one was in New York City, and the broadcast ratings went really well. And so that led to like 50 stations, and then more and more and more. And then over multiple years, most PBS stations and Emmy Awards. But the great thing about PBS is that you can own the rights to all the content. So we didn't realize that early on, because we actually had a development deal with MTV early on after the book kind of took off. And it just felt so bad. They wanted to, I'll never forget being in a meeting and one of the producers was like, okay, when do we vote someone off the motorhome?
You're like, wait, that's not the purpose here.
like we're not voting someone off the motorhome. Like we're
bringing them together.
We're trying to help them find their road. They're like, what? And we're like, and so
you're like, I don't know if this is a fit.
Yeah, that's when we met the people from PBS, and they were like, if you come to PBS, you can have three things. You can do mission-based programming. You don't have to vote anyone off the motorhome. We're not as cool as MTV, but you can do mission-based programming. You can have longevity. Shows on PBS are around for like decades, which has been true for us now, 20 seasons. And you can maintain all the rights and all the intellectual property to all the content you produce. And we had no idea how important that would be when we were 22 years old, but now we own one of the largest media archives of its kind focused on career pathways that happens to have a lot of value for schools, that license it, and partners of ours that license it. And that's a big part of what funds and keeps our operation going, every year. So,
oh, that's amazing. So, one step at a time, You started, things happened, and you just kind of said yes, said we're going to the next level. How do you think that would play out today with the social media platforms and a completely different approach? It from 20 years ago, things have changed drastically. Do you think you would be as successful with the current social media environment?
I think my take on this stuff is like barriers to entry get lower with time and with technology. So like we couldn't have done Roadtrip Nation even 5 years earlier because the Sony VX2000 hadn't come out. And before then it was like huge $50,000 video cameras. Like we could have never filmed that road trip, you know, in that quality. It was like the Sony VX2000 was $1,800. Fry's had a 90-day return policy, and
You're like, we can always return it.
road trip, 90 days. Yeah, exactly. So, and that really enabled that to happen. But, so, I mean, I'd like to think that like today and it, you know, even like for our kids or whatever, that like projects like that, I think are way more accessible than people think. It's more about a mindset shift. I think that like, I hope the next generation leverages those lower barriers. And I think AI will do that too, you know, even for entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship, which I consider Roadtrip Nation like a social enterprise. I think that the barrier to entry, to me, when I think about the future of work, that's really what it's going to be about. You know, with AI decreasing the barrier to entry for taking a great idea and making it a real thing. And I think the next generation is going to be more about creating your own job and leveraging AI to help you do that. And AI is going to change the landscape pretty significantly. The real issue will be like, do you leverage AI to manifest your idea, or do you let AI basically disrupt whatever career path you're in? So I think teaching kids and the next generation entrepreneurial skills, I think is enormous, whether they do it for tech-based things, social enterprise-based things, or just building a local, I don't know, food truck or something, you know. That's what gets me excited about future of work. So
yeah, I was talking to a couple that's in AI and entertainment, and they were having that same discussion of who's creating it? Is the human creating the ideas, or is AI? And their take was it's the human. AI can't come up with new creative ideas. They amplify and they you know, make it come into fruition or make it real. But the humans and the creativity. And so then I was talking to some folks in the, you know, education realm about how do we educate our kids, and really focusing on maybe philosophy of things and just that creative side. That's going to be my favorite quote of the podcast, actually, is you know, kids these days are going to create their own careers, create their own jobs. Like, that's phenomenal. I love that quote. I love that concept that they're going to create what they want to do. They don't have to rely on, I mean, there's a place for companies, there's a place for corporate, for bigger things. Gosh, that's so interesting that they're going to just create their own jobs, their own career.
100%. And I think I get a little worried. I'm like a super hyper optimist. My one shred of worry as like a parent and looking at next generation is like our system of how kids are going through school right now. And also like club sports and, you know, which you and I are, you know, kind of like
right in the middle of, yeah.
It's very structured. Like life is very structured. And I think kids, entrepreneurship and creating your own reality and manifesting the idea in your head, it many times is a very unstructured thing. So helping kids get more comfortable in more unstructured environments and helping them wayfind through those environments, I think is like super important for kid development right now, and like preparing them for the future. You know, as like a parent, it's weird because as a parent, you want to like provide more structure, provide more safety, but in effect, their future will have probably less structure and more volatility and more change. Less pensions and, you know, less benefits and less, you know, they're going to have to be in charge of, on one hand, the barrier to entry is coming down so that if you have a great idea, I think it'll be easier to make that a reality. On the other hand, I think there's more volatility so that like the traditional, you know, safe job, I think is not going to be as readily accessible anymore. So,
or a safe.
I
mean, it might be there, but it's just not going to be as safe as it is today. There is no like silver bullet. Yeah, I see that in the kids, and it's taken me a while because I'm on my third kid and I'm just figuring all this out. But my oldest, I'm kind of giving a lot more freedom. Like the structure, because we have the means that we do, and we have the ability, and we have, you know, access to a lot of stuff here. whatever they want to do, sky's the limit, go for it. Well, the structure of that and the busyness of that gets so intense that you're like, gosh, we can't continue to just have every second of your day scheduled. And so the oldest, I'm starting to give that one a lot more freedom of like, just go be with your friends, go ride your bike and see what they're doing. I didn't allow that early on. And so now my third, we're at home quite, I'm allowing us to be at home more, just hanging out, watching TV. And he ends up finding stuff to do. He's bored watching TV, multitasking, but kind of bored. And he finds interesting stuff. And his creativity is getting so much better at such a younger age. I'm like, wow, it could have been helpful to learn this a little bit earlier, but it is what it is.
Everything happens for a reason, and kids are all different, and it's never too late. Encouraging kids to just like take risks and have big ideas and try to take them from their head to reality. But it could be my daughter like she loves orangutans, so she started like an orange juice stand to like raise money for orangutans, and she went down to Rainbow Lemonade. It was a rainbow lemonade stand, and she had like different types of lemonade, and she put it down in front of farmers market and raised like $500 to save the orangutan.
Holy cow!
And
Yeah,
all her friends involved, but just that was powerful for her to kind of go from, I care about orangutans, I'm gonna do something about it. I'm gonna go bootleg it. I'm gonna go down to the farmers market. She couldn't go inside farmers market because then she needed a permit, but she could go right outside the farmers market where everyone kind of walks in, and but it was cool watching her go through that cycle of just trying something. And if it doesn't work, like no big deal, but just the messiness and
and the accomplishment, and then the confidence that comes from that. Like I did something, I put it into action, something happened at the end, and now it's a much more confident person. I do remember some stories. So you and your wife would host like plays, and all the neighborhood kids would come and be in the play. Like I loved that.
Yeah, it's during the pandemic, we turned our backyard into like backyard theater, and we have a friend who's like a fun, crazy theater, director, and so it was, pandemic was kind of a strange time, but that was like a fun way to make it a little more interesting. My wife Katie is like super creative and always hosting fun stuff like that, and she's a good example of someone just kind of like, oh, let's just do like backyard theater, and just kind of like
you're like, okay,
just like role modeling that of just like having an idea, but also like making it real, making it like putting what's your next steps and what's your to-dos, and that building that kind of muscle of like taking something from an idea in your head to like reality,
building it,
and
executing it. That model for the kids, I think, is important, and just creativity in general is important. Awesome. Oh my gosh, Mike, this has been fantastic. So I already picked my quote of the podcast. That was the future kids. They're going to create their own careers. They're going to create their own jobs just from their own creativity and using the tools and the AI that they have. Gosh, that is just such a great idea. And I totally agree with that. What is your favorite quote of the podcast? Wrapping it up.
My favorite quote of the podcast, I think, creating unstructured opportunities for kids just to like run around the house, do art. Like I think that's the part that, when I think about my personal story, like growing up on Laguna Beach, whenever that was, like 35 years ago, like it was a little different now. Like now Laguna's like a little fancier, and Laguna was like a much more unstructured place back then, and you would just kind of run around town, and
I love the freedom.
Finding ways to create more unstructured experiences for kids. I think that's just like you're finding with your youngest, and I think that's like
great.
Can only be good. So
I love it. Well, Roadtrip Nation, I'm very excited about it. If you end up doing a space episode, I'm all in. I can definitely get you my background.
It's gonna happen.
Oh, awesome. Okay, well, thanks for being on the podcast, and we will see you around town.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Have a good one. Thank you for joining the Be Engaged podcast. This podcast was prepared by the author in her personal capacity. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the author and do not reflect the official policy, opinion, or position of her employer. Thank you again for joining. All rights reserved to Be Engaged.